Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. I'm back in the shop, and my idea for today is to do another build. Now, I've been working on some new lure holders, something that will replace my trusty lure bow, this is something that I've been using. I designed this about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've been using it ever since. The whole concept behind the lure bow is that you have something that you can put the lure in right after you're done sanding it down. You put it in the lure bow and it stays there all the way through the finishing process. So it'll go from the paint station to my clear coat station and then into the lure turner and be turned right in this and never have to be moved. So I've got a few already ready to go. So essentially all this is a couple of wires that have been bent around each other enough so that they slide against each other and self-tension and self-adjust. Let me show you on this little 3.5 inch swim bait, and all you do is get it hooked up, and then once you got it there, you just tension it, and that's it. It stays there and it will not come off. And this way you can go through the whole finishing process without ever having to touch that lure, which gives you a much better chance of getting a good finish at the end. Now, the limitations for this thing is really in size and weight. Once you get past, let's say about 5.5 inches, this lure is 5.5 inches long, and it's right at the very end of this bow's ability to actually hang on to it. And it's a little bit tenuous to leave it on there, but it'll hold it. Now that I'm building larger lures, longer lures, heavier lures, I needed a lure holder that could hold big lures. But ideally, I wanted something that could go from a 2-inch all the way to a 14-inch lure without having to change holders. Let me show you what I came up with. Here it is holding a 2-inch lure, and here it is holding my 10-inch swim bait that I made in a couple of videos before. If you haven't seen the making of this hinge, you should watch it. I'll put a little card right here so you can go and check it out. But I can use this holder on anything, any size lure that I make. And here you can see it with progressively larger lures, all the way up from 5.5 here, 6.5 here, 7.5 right here, all the way up to nearly 10 inches. I'll go ahead and show you. I'll take this one off, and you can see it has springy connectors, and then it telescopes to hold just about any lure you could possibly make. So let me show you what I've made this thing out of. You probably already guessed that it was something telescoping. You might have thought maybe an antenna, but no, this is like a back scratcher, one of these cheap dollar store back scratchers. I bought these things actually at a local dollar hardware store kind of a thing. They were 3 for $4, so pretty inexpensive. I've also found similar ones online for about $1 a piece. So you can buy these things in bulk if you're so inclined and you're going to make a bunch of them. So this is essentially how it starts. It's real simple to make. Let's go ahead and go through the build. Well, depending on what kind of telescoping rod you end up getting, most of them are going to have some kind of head, either a magnetic head or grappling head or back scratcher, whatever it is you end up with, and then they're all going to have some kind of rubber handle. First step is to go ahead and take this rubber handle off, and you can just strip it back and it'll just peel off really easily, and then you can just slide it off. The head itself is going to vary from unit to unit, and you're going to have to make a decision on whether you want to save the sleeve. On these you have this little aluminum collar or sleeve, and if you wiggle it, it'll allow you to pull out that scratching hand. Okay, so the collar came off, both the handle, and it also came off the wand, but that's okay. I'll slip it back on, but this gives me a chance to show you what you'd end up with if you didn't have a collar. I would recommend, if you end up without a collar, that you maybe make one out of a tube or a piece of plastic, or you just might want to fill that first inch of this tube with a little bit of 5-minute epoxy. Okay, I've got this super glued in. Now I've got the raw materials ready to rock. The next thing I would recommend is that you extend it out all the way and then compress that last segment into the second to last segment and glue these two together so that really you have the thickest parts of these segments that are really useful. So I'm going to go ahead and just glue these first two together. That'll give me good friction and a nice rigid rod after it's extended out. And put it right here at this junction. It doesn't take much. The next thing I'm going to need to do is have a handle, right? I've got to make this little handle, and simply I just take a piece of CPVC, this is 1/2 inch, and cut a 1 3/4 inch piece off of it. Now I use these because they have a relatively thick wall, so they're nice and stiff. They're easy to cut. You can cut it with just about any kind of saw, and they fit my end caps on my lure turner. So you see, they just go right into here, and these are nothing but caps that are meant to seal the end of a tube. So I've got this cut, that's all I need. Now if you are using a lure turner that doesn't hold the end, but actually holds it from the center, you can just take this CPVC and glue it in somewhere near the center here, or at least somewhere on the fattest part of this rod. You can glue it in place there, and then at that point you can set it in your lure turner and allow it to turn it from that point. Okay, so the next step is to glue in this handle. Now, I use hot glue. I'm going to use this gun right here. I'm going to let it get hot. And while it's getting hot, let me give you one more tip. If you're going to use a more center located gripping handle using this, you're going to want to pull this out so that you can drill through the back for your spring or your sprung little lure hook. If not, you'll drill through all of your wands and you won't be able to telescope it out. Also, for gluing this into the bottom, you want to extract them all out as well, because you don't want to glue any of them in place. I'll be gluing this little handle right on the end of the fattest part of this wand. The way I like to do it is I'll take a smooth surface. This is just a piece of scrap aluminum, and I'm gonna spritz it down either with silicone spray or a little mold release. So what I like to do is put like about 1/4 inch of glue at the very bottom. I'll stab this in, and then I'll glue up the outside. So I'll just pour some in there. Shove it down in there. And it'll cool pretty quickly. So once it's semi-cooled, I'll start gluing on the outside. You can see you end up with a nice glassy finish at the bottom there. And now I'm just gonna pump glue in there. Not worrying that I'm shoving it out of round, because I'll shove it back into round in a moment. And as it's still pliable, you can fine-tune the center. So as it cools, you can just clean up the stuff that got a little extra on it. Right, so now we have the basic component. Now we just need to make our little wire lure keepers. And these are made just from standard wire, lure making wire. You'll notice this back one is just a coil. And the reason I did that is because I don't want to have to drill through this. Because if you drill through it, then this next piece and all the pieces afterwards will stop right where you drilled it, and that'll be the extent of how far back you can go with it. So the way they make this coil is pretty simple. I made it with this. This is 0.05 inch wire, stainless steel. This is not annealed, so it springs back. You can't just wrap it around the same diameter. You actually have to wrap it around about 20% less diameter. And that actually turns out to be right at the diameter of the inside of the tube. So if you can find a rod or a bolt that fits in the inside of that tube, you got the right diameter. So what you'll do is you'll leave yourself about 2.5 inches of wire, and then with a pair of vice grips, wherever that is, I'm going to take a pair of vice grips and just pinch it onto the bolt. And you only really need just a few windings, right? That's about 4 windings, and that's all I'm going to give it. I'm going to go around, and I'm going to make sure I pull it nice and tense. And you can see it springs back, and now it looks like it won't fit, but that's perfect. That's what you want. You want something that you can then sort of expand. You take the 2 legs, expand the coil, and slide this on. And now you have a nice stiff coil that holds on really well to your tube. I'm going to cut this long end off, he said, and then this will be my holder, and I'll have to bend it the right length. Now this extension from the tube out is going to depend on how fat your lures are. All those lures you saw me put on this all fit really well, with about 1.5 inches from the center of this tube for both the front and the back. What I use for this front one is this R-bend spinner rig. These are 0.03 wire, stainless steel, and I straightened out the one leg, and then I'll cut this off, and you'll notice that'll give me that end. And then I want to twist this coil. Now it doesn't matter what coil size, but I like to have it about 3 windings around like a 10-penny nail will give you about 1/4 inch with a little spring. Now it's the same kind of routine. You'll just find the spot you want to bend. Of course, none of this stuff is rocket science, so if your dimensions are slightly different than mine, I don't think that's a big deal. And I'll give it a couple of winds, and that should do it. And get it to just bend straight up. And then you've got your little spring coil. And that really comes in handy when you're putting those lures on, because it gives you that little extra flexibility so you can get into those lure hook eyes. What I do now is I drill 2 holes, and that gives me the opportunity to shoot this wire through, bend it over into a little U, and pull it back in so it won't spin on me. And then I just glue it in place with a little bit of crazy glue. This first one I'll go all the way through. Just go through the first wall. Okay, so the next step is to poke this through the hole all the way through, and then I'll make a little U-turn and stick it back down into the hole, and that should do the trick. So I've got it partially made. Now I'm just gonna tuck this little bent part in, reducing that U until it fits in your hole, and there it is. And it goes straight in there. Now I'll put a little bit of crazy glue on it. Okay, so now I'm going to take the coil. I've got one made, so I'm just going to use this. You can probably figure out how to make the bends for this. The next tip I'm going to give you is actually pretty critical. If you'll notice, this hook is pointing straight back and it's vertical. This hook will point forward, but it's horizontal, and that's really important. So let me put this on and I'll show you why that's really important. And this is how you put this on. You basically grab the 2 ends and expand it by turning against the coils, and it slides right on, but it gives you a lot of friction. You slide it up far enough so it's out of the way of the cap that's going to hold this thing in your lure turner. The reason it's important to have one of your hooks horizontal and one of them vertical is because it puts tension on your lure, because most of the time both the front and back loops are vertical, and what this does, it puts a little bit of tension because it's a little offset. So what that does, it doesn't allow your lure to flop around. As it's going around, it doesn't flop. If these were both vertical or both horizontal, it would have a 45-degree flop as it would turn on your lure turner. Let's see how this new one can handle this big, nearly 10-inch lure. So that's pretty good. So you can see it holds it pretty stiff. It'll rotate in that lure turner pretty nicely, and I can go from the painting booth to the lure turner without ever having to touch my lure. It's kind of nice to be able to have a giant lure and a micro lure on the same kind of holder. I know all you lure makers out there have your own way of holding your lures, but I hope that at least this gives you some ideas. So thanks for watching. Keep those comments coming and suggestions. I'll catch you on the next video.